Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Ted Fitzgerald of the State Board of Elections. We're here to present information to you tonight about the upcoming voter ID laws, information that'll help you when you go to the polls. And as we go through this, we're going to be talking about, of course, the new voter ID laws, but we're going to be covering other things as well, provisional ballots, voter registration, and residency. These are all topics that we get a lot of questions about, so we are going to mix it in with the voter ID laws. First thing I want to say is to everyone is that voter ID is not required for any election in 2019. However, in 2020, starting with the primary, all voters are going to be asked to show photo identification when presenting to vote at the polls. Also, voters will be asked to include a copy of their photo ID when voting absentee by mail. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in just a minute. But I wanted to show you this. These are all the acceptable IDs that will be accepted at the polls. And we're going to cover these one by one in just a minute, but I wanted to show these to you. Most of us have this, the North Carolina driver's license or ID card. This is the most common, and this is what you're going to see the most at the polls. Now, this card needs to be valid and current. However, it cannot be expired by more than 1 year. So it can be expired, but by no more than 1 year. We will also accept a U.S. passport and passport card. Again, these cannot be expired by more than 1 year. Military, both active, retired, dependents, and spouses can all use their military ID cards as well as the Veterans Benefit Card. And these have no expiration limits on them. Another card that we're going to be accepting are cards that are federally recognized tribal ID cards. We have one federally recognized tribe in our state, that's the Cherokee. Now, these cards have no expiration limits. Also, an approved tribal enrollment card from a state-recognized tribe. We have 7 state-recognized tribes, and these cards have no expiration limits. Now, these cards have to be approved by the state board, and we're in that process right now. The deadline has been extended to November 1st, 2019. We have a list of all of these approved cards, and it's on our website. So as we go along this year, you can check the website and see our list of approved cards. Approved student ID card from a state or private university or community college. Now, an expiration date is not required on these cards until 2021, and the deadline to approve these cards has been extended to November 1st, 2019. In addition to the student cards, an approved employee ID card from a state or local government agency, public or charter school, or a public university will also be accepted. And again, the expiration date is not required for these cards until 2021. Now, if you want to see, again, the list of all of the cards that have been approved, we've got that on our website. Now, what about people who are moving into our state? Persons from another state, District of Columbia, or territory or commonwealth of the U.S. can use their cards only if they are registering to vote within 90 days of the election. And these cards also cannot be expired by more than 1 year. Now, what about people who are over 65, who might have one of these forms of ID that have been expired for more than a year? Persons over 65 can use any of those forms of ID that we just went through, and they are acceptable as long as the ID was not expired on the voter's 65th birthday. So their cards, as long as they were valid when the voter was 65, they can use that card. There's no limit on the expiration on those cards. Now, this is a question we get most often. What if I don't have one of these photo ID cards? Persons who do not have a photo ID can go get a new voter photo ID card at their county board of elections. Now, this is just for voting purposes only, but it is something that is provided free And it's a very simple process to get one of these. All you do is a registered voter just needs to go down to their County Board of Elections and provide their name, date of birth, and the last 4 digits of their Social Security number. And this card is valid for 10 years. Now, if this card expires in 10 years, that doesn't mean the voter becomes inactive. This has nothing to do with the voter's registration. The County Board of Elections will also replace this if they need to because it's been defaced or lost or the person's appearance has changed. All they need to do is go to the County Board of Elections any time that the Board of Elections office is open, and they can get one of these cards. The exception to that is the period between the last day of early voting and Election Day. It's the only time that they will not be making the cards. So how is this going to change the process when you go to vote? For both early voting and Election Day, the voter will appear at the voting site and present to vote. The precinct official is going to ask them to state their name and their current address, and the voter will state their name and address just like they do right now, and they'll present one of the acceptable forms of ID to the precinct official. After examination, if a precinct official states the voter is duly registered, the voter is going to receive a regular ballot. Curbside. Curbside voting is, of course, available at all North Carolina voting sites during the one-stop absentee voting period and Election Day. Curbside voters will state their name and their address, and they'll take the affirmation oath, and then they'll present their photo ID. Now, we mentioned absentee by mail. Voters who vote absentee by mail must attach a form of acceptable identification to their absentee by mail packet. Now, if a voter is unable to do that, they can sign an affidavit that will be included with their packet, and that simply declares that something prevented them from enclosing a copy of their photo ID, or they didn't have an access to a method to make a copy of their ID. And I need to say that military overseas citizens, they're not impacted by our voter photo ID requirements. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. The second question we get asked a lot is, can I vote without an ID? All voters are going to be allowed to vote with or without an acceptable form of ID. When voting in person, you'll be asked to present a photo ID. If you don't have one, you have several choices. If you have time, you can obtain one from your County Board of Elections. If you don't have time, you can vote provisionally. Now, your provisional ballot will count if you do one of two things. You bring an acceptable photo ID to your County Board of Elections office before canvass. And now remember, canvass is that 10-day period after the election before the results are officially certified. So if you do not have a photo ID when you go to vote, let's say you left it at home, then you would just bring it to the Board of Elections sometime during canvass. And when you do that, your provisional is going to count. Or if you do not have a photo ID, you can sign an affidavit declaring that something prevented you from obtaining an ID. Let's stop for a minute and talk about provisional ballots. We get a lot of questions about provisionals. Now, provisionals are the fail-safe for everyone. Provisionals are offered when there are any questions about a voter's qualifications, or their eligibility to vote, or their eligibility to vote a specific ballot style. There are also other reasons provisional ballots are offered, and one of them is photo ID. If a voter does not present an acceptable form of photo ID, a provisional ballot is going to be offered to that voter. And that ballot is going to count or be counted when the voter brings an acceptable form of ID no later than the end of business on the last day before canvass or qualifies for a reasonable impediment. Now, reasonable impediments, simply unable to get a photo ID due to any of these reasons. And there's some other reasons as well. And this could happen to any of us. Lost or stolen ID. If you lose your ID before the election, you could sign the reasonable impediment because you have a stolen or lost ID card. Also, photo ID, you've applied for it but haven't received it yet, or other reasons to be described by the voter. If there's a reason that it's not covered on our form, there's a space where the voter can fill it in. There's some other exceptions to presenting a photo ID, which include a religious objection to being photographed and a natural disaster. For example, a hurricane, for example, in this area, that occurs within 100 days of the election and is declared a natural disaster by the governor or the president. Now, no one is ever going to be turned away from the polls or told they can't vote because they do not have a photo ID. Those provisional ballots offer everyone the opportunity to vote. We're going to touch on voter registration for a minute. We get a lot of questions about this, and I'm sure that you do too in this area. First of all, in order to register to vote in North Carolina, a person has to do two things. First, meet the legal qualifications to vote, and secondly, they have to complete a voter registration application. Now, what are those qualifications? Must be a citizen of the United States, have to live in the county for at least 30 days prior to the date of the election, must be 18 years old, and must not be serving a felony sentence or conviction, including probation or parole. Now, when a person is convicted of a felony, they lose their right to vote. Once they have completed their sentence, including probation or parole, they can re-register to vote, and their rights are restored. And 17-year-olds can register to vote and vote in a primary if they're going to be 18 by the general election. And don't forget, we can pre-register now. Voters up to 2 years before their 18th birthday. Most often they pre-register at the DMV, but they can do it at the Board of Elections office or in the high school. And so when they turn 18, they are already in our system and they're ready to go. So where do you register to vote? Well, as I said, you need to fill out a form, and you can get the form online at either our website or the county's website. You can also go to the county, pick up a form in person. Our office, the county board office, public libraries have them. High schools and universities have voter registration. And there are other places to do it as well. And also, voter registration drives. Now, anyone can conduct a voter registration drive, but they need to follow the rules, and we have the rules found on our website. Voter registration services are also offered at these agencies to people who enroll in services. DMV is the most common. People who sign up for services at social services, public health, disability service agencies, and they include vocational rehab, for example, and the Division of Employment Security, all offer voter registration to people who are down there applying for services. And we have to remind everyone that registration ends 25 days before each election. Now, if someone does not register by the 25-day deadline, does that mean they can't register and vote in the election? We have something in our state called early voting, also called one-stop and same-day registration. So if you miss the regular registration, don't worry, you can still register and vote during one-stop, and it's easy. Just go to a one-stop site and complete a voter registration application and prove residence by completing any one of the following: North Carolina driver's license with the current name and address, or the NC ID card or a other government agency issued ID card with your current name and address, or a non-photo form of identification, such as a utility bill, bank statement, government paycheck, or other government document, as long as it has the voter's name and current address. Now, these are used to prove residency. These are not photo IDs for voting. That's different. We're talking about voter registration at this point. Also, college IDs can be used as long as there is proof of campus habitation. So they would need to show something that has their campus address on it. Of course, you can use the voter registration forms to update your name, your address, or your party, and you can update that any time except for party affiliation. You can do that any time except during the primary. We mentioned the overseas and military citizens a minute ago. They can vote several different ways. They can vote like you and I do by requesting a mail-in absentee ballot the same way as other registered voters, or they can apply to register and or vote through special programs that are just for the military and overseas voters. We can't use these programs. They're just for them. And they go to their website, the Federal Voter Assistance Program, for these programs. And they are not impacted by our voter photo ID requirements. So we get a lot of questions too about residency. What address do you use when you register to vote? Use your permanent address. Now, this is defined as the place where you live and the place to which you plan to return to when you're absent. For example, if you temporarily relocate to another place, can you still vote? Yes. A voter that relocates with the intent of returning maintains their permanent residence. So, for example, if someone in this county moves out of the county temporarily, maybe they're dislocated by a hurricane and they intend to come back, they can still vote in this county even though they're not living in the county at the time, because they're just temporarily out of the county. Now, if you change your permanent address, are you still able to vote at your previous address? No. If you move into a new permanent address, you lose your residency based upon the previous address. So if you move out of the county and you set up a residence in another county or state, you lose the ability to vote in this county. Now, what about homeless? We do get a lot of questions about homeless people. So if a person's residence is not associated with property, then the location of their usual sleeping area, or the place where they sleep, that's considered their residence. And it's broadly construed to make sure that all persons have the opportunity to register and vote. Our voter registration application has a map where a homeless person can indicate the place in the county where they sleep adjacent to the nearest cross streets. And then the Board of Elections will locate that on a map and place them in the right precinct. Now, we do need to mention that a homeless person will have to have a valid mailing address and receive mail. Now, it doesn't have to be necessarily their mailing address. It could be a relative's, or it could be a homeless shelter, for example. What about college students? Where do college students vote? So college students can register and vote where they are attending college if they intend to make that college community their home. Now, that doesn't mean they have to stay there after graduation. It just means that they intend to make that college community their home. Now, if the college student intends to return home after graduation, or they intend to consider their home address to be their home, then they can register or remain registered at their home address. And they can just vote by absentee ballot or return home to vote in person during election day or early voting. It's really up to the student to determine that. And it's important to know that if a student registers at their school address, any previous registration that they have will be canceled in another county or state when they register at that school address. And we always end up our presentation on residency by reminding people to just vote only in one place. Double voting is a felony. So back to the voter ID. How are we telling the public about this? What are we going to be doing over this next year for the remainder of this year? In 2019, we're going to be mailing 2 separate mailers to every household in the state. And we're going to do that again in 2020. 2 separate mailers will go out to every household in the state to notify them about the requirement. We're also working with media outlets to make sure that they get the information out. Poll workers are going to have information about this when voters go to vote at the polls in the 2019 election. And if they have questions about this, poll workers will be trained to answer those questions. We're also doing some local organizational outreach. If any organizations or local groups want to give a presentation, we'll help them with that. We can even come do the presentation for them. And one other thing that we're doing is we are putting together a list of people who are registered to vote in North Carolina, but they don't have a North Carolina driver's license or an ID card issued by the DMV. We're going to get that list together and we're going to notify them separately. And lastly, we just ask you to get involved, become an election official, work at the polls, or if you know of a student in high school who's 17 years old and is a good student who wants to get involved, they can be what's called a student election assistant. And they are people who work at the polls. They have the same job as election officials. They're trained the same way as election officials, and they're paid the same as election officials. It's a great opportunity for kids in high school who want to get more involved. Also, you can be a part of a MAT team. Multi-partisan assistance teams go to state licensed facilities such as nursing homes, and they help voters there request absentee ballots or vote an absentee ballot. And because it's multi-partisan, meaning there's one person from each party present, the voters they're able to help the voters cast those absentee ballots there and assist them with filling out the ballot. So that's a great way to be of service. We're coming up to the end of our presentation. I just wanted to point out some resources where you can go to get this information, including the presentation that I'm currently giving. This is our main web page, ncsbe.gov. On this main page, you can look up your voter registration. You can find your polling place. You can check to see if your absentee ballot has been received. You can download voter registration forms. There's a lot of things you can do on the website. There's a link to the voter ID page, which takes you to our special page, which is all about voter ID. And on the right-hand side of that, under resources, we've got some downloadable material that you can download and print if you want to distribute it in your community. And also under references, we have got the statutes and rules, including the draft rules, and court decisions that affect voter ID. All of that is available to you right there on the website. And this presentation is also available to you on the website. I want to finish up by talking a little bit about security. The State Board of Elections takes security and integrity of elections very seriously. It's our #1 priority, and it's our priority in everything that we do. You have the right to be confident that your vote counts and know that we are doing everything we can to protect your vote. Now, our website here contains information about what we're doing. It's a lot. And there's also a summary of the 2016 election, which goes into depth about some of the investigations into fraudulent voting that occurred in that election. All of this is available on the website, and the information is right there for you. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Thank you for your time.